This session is a happy hour hangout with our industry friends and partners. Before we go into the happy hour, I'd like to thank our funder. Thank you to the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation for all their support of CAAM's work, especially for their support of the summit. If you've been able to catch some of our previous sessions, you'll have seen some really great panel discussions yesterday and today. We just had one with another friend of ours from the IDA, Dana, and she talked to Marjan and Grace about grant writing. Incredible panel. This one is supposed to be a happy hour hangout. And if we had been together in person in San Francisco, you know, no hangout is complete without our executive director, Stephen Gong. So we've invited him to join us here as well. He's going to be picking up the tab for this happy hour. Thank you very much, Stephen. Even if we're not here in person together, I wanted to start this off with a little toast. So perhaps we can start with Stephen, and when you do your toast, maybe do a brief intro of who you are and the organization that you represent. And then perhaps the toast can be a thank you to something or someone that you're grateful to for making this shelter in place a little bit more bearable for you. All right, we're gonna start with Stephen. I'm gonna let you go first.
Oh, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Greetings from the McCrae Park Fish Pond in Oakland, California. The surf's high today out here. Weather's beautiful. We're loving it. I'm loving it. It's Friday. The summit's concluded. So I want to toast everyone for joining us. You know, this is real community. And there's so much uncertainty. And I know our thoughts are so often, you know, with what's going on in the world. And I guess I would say, I do feel privileged to be part of this community that is trying to do something to make the world better. So until we can meet again in person, here's to all of you and everyone for joining us. And congratulations and thank you for being here. Prost.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Stephen. I think we're going to go now in alphabetical order by last name. So I'm going to have Karim go next. If you could do a little toast and then maybe introduce yourself briefly.
Sure.
Thank you.
I don't have a beverage because it's Ramadan, so I'm fasting, but I'll pretend to toast to you right now with a glass of air. Thanks, CAAM, for having me. My name's Karim Ahmad. I'm a writer and a producer, and I oversee the Outreach and Inclusion Program at the Sundance Institute. I guess, I mean, honestly, the thing that is making life under quarantine bearable for me is just my family. And so I'm going to give a huge shout out to them, but I'm going to expand that a little bit and just give a huge shout out to all the parents and caregivers and folks that are caring for anyone in their communities or families, folks that are caring for elders or, you know, folks with pre-existing health conditions. I think, you know, we're all struggling in a lot of different ways right now, but particularly for those that have, you know, vulnerable members in their community and their families that they're caring for. These are particularly challenging times. And I just want to give a huge shout out to all of you guys.
Thank you, Karim. Yes, I'm going to move on now to Iyabo Boyd. Cheers.
Hey, everyone. I'm Iyabo Boyd, writer, director, and also the founder, director of Brown Girls Stock Mafia. So glad to be here. Thank you, CAAM and everyone, Sapana and the whole team for having us. I'm grateful to be on this call with our peers and friends in the space. I want to give a shout out to actually the Brown Girls Stock Mafia leadership team, to our board, to Emily Cohen-Ibanez, Mia Saralai, and Ileana Sosa for stepping in. I actually got sick during this whole thing and was out for a few weeks, and those wonderful women stepped in and kind of kept the train on its tracks. And I'm so grateful to them and grateful to the whole BGDM community who really stepped in and just did some self-nurturing with each other. This, as we're going to talk about today, collectives and spaces where we can kind of hold each other and be there for each other has become even more important. And so I'm grateful for all the folks on the Brown Girls page who has been offering resources, who've been offering phone calls with each other, et cetera, et cetera. So, and cheers especially also to Monika on the call here for kicking ass at Firelight and offering extending their sisterhood to Brown Girls and being a leader for all of us in the POC space. So thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to Michael.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Kinomoto, and I'm a supervising producer at ITVS. And I just wanted to really, again, put out an appreciation for CAAM Fest, because I think at this time, you know, we all have felt like we're on a deserted desert island, you know, not just as we see Stephen here, but we felt that way. But, you know, it's events that make community like this that, you know, they remind us that we may be alone, but we're alone in it together. And it's really this moment to really build solidarity and community. And so it's great to see your faces, and I'm imagining the faces of everybody out there joining us today. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Cheers. Next, we're going to move on to Carrie Lozano.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you all. I do wish we were in person, but it's just lovely to know we're all here together. So I'm Carrie Lozano. I'm with the International Documentary Association. And I think, you know, it doesn't bear repeating that this is a really difficult time. And thanks, Karim, for what you said. That really resonates with me about how hard this juggle is for so many people. We're all in it. This is such an unusual moment because we are all experiencing it. There's no escaping it. And that is simply unprecedented. And I think the silver lining to me, and the thing that I would toast at 3 p.m. here in the photos from Camden, from the Camden Film Festival, but here in Northern California, is the silver lining is all of you, and is all the partnership and collaboration that's going on behind the scenes. Filmmakers may not totally see it, and that's okay. But I know what's happening behind the scenes is that all these organizations are working tirelessly together to see what we can do together for the field, to strengthen our field, to serve filmmakers. And to me, it's just such a pleasure to be part of that, to watch those collaborations happening. I know they'll continue, and we've always been a collaborative field, but this is a moment where I'm really seeing those bonds really show and it's in strengthen, actually. So thanks to all of you for being such incredible collaborators.
Cheers, here. Next, we're going to move on to Monika Navarro.
Hey everyone, thank you Iyabo for that sweet acknowledgement. Monika Navarro, I'm with Firelight, and I'm really grateful to be here now. I love the whole CAAM team, and CAAM Fest is super special in my heart. I guess when I think about what's helped me get through the quarantine, I'd first have to say my partner. I mean, you certainly learn if you like someone when you're stuck all day with someone. So yeah, I have to say I'm grateful that, like, you know, have a strong partnership to help the quarantine. So, you know, hopefully we won't be one of the COVID divorces, we'll be one of the COVID babies that come out of it. But also, yeah, like family in the broader sense of the world, because I think for, like, you know, we're in some ways like part of a film family together. Folks always use that, but I think we've really seen in some respects that's really been true these past 9-10 weeks. So, you know, I'm grateful for the Firelight family. It's good to be at a place right now where the work feels meaningful, and it's really like led with the heart and listening to the filmmakers. And every conversation I've had with like a partner with a filmmaker, you know, has really focused what we're doing. But also like has strengthened, like I think a lot about Dolores Huerta and like the power of the people. So I've like, this moment has kind of sharpened some organizing skills. So I really am grateful to like every person during this time I've had a conversation with, I've worked with, because that's what's helped make this time bearable too. So cheers with a Mexican Coke.
Cheers. Thank you, Monica. And last but not least, Robert.
Hello, everybody. It's so nice to be here. I'm very grateful to have been a part of the CAAM family for quite a while, since the time it was a Nata family. So I'm really happy to be here now. Lately, I've been thinking about what people have been talking about in terms of respond, recover, reimagine, which is kind of the task ahead of us, and the reason why this moment is both a sprint and a marathon, but which is tiring, right? But then I think, well, we can add on to this list of words that start with R, and in the spirit of happy hour on a Friday, I think we can also think about relaxing and rejuvenating, right? And to maintain space for this. And what's been really helpful for me in terms of doing that is again, to come back to community in all its different forms. Yep, family, dog, neighborhood, park, for sure. But the one thing I'd like to lift up right now is Sapana, thank you. And your, in particular for your matcha mochi recipe, which came early in the pandemic and kind of set the tone for how to respond to crazy moments when you don't know what else to do. You bake something unhealthy. So thank you for that.
I made that cake too off of Sapna's recipe. It was freaking delicious.
Yeah.
Sapna, can you share that in the chat?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's now going viral.
Yes.
Yes.
For days.
Cheers to matcha mochi. Yes, and in that same vein, I wanted to thank everyone in this community. That's really, I think, why I wanted to do this hangout is because I feel like, in this moment, the world's, our sort of silos have collapsed, right? There is no personal, private, or professional. I mean, there is no division anymore, and everything has sort of merged. And in that moment, or at least personally, I've realized why it's been so wonderful to be a part of this film community. It's not just work. It is really about a lot of the things, a lot of the values that we believe in personally that we've been able to carry out through our work. And I've been really grateful to have, my colleagues at CAAM, but also my colleagues in the field. So once again, cheers to all of you. Thank you for bearing with me in this virtual hangout situation. I'm really glad to be able to share this with you all. So yeah, I just wanted to start off, and we've already, touched on this with our various toasts, but it seems to me that there was this, moment when everything changed, I guess only a month ago, that people in the community, in the field, and I'm speaking specifically about the documentary field, that we really rallied and we understood that this wasn't just about professional livelihoods, but it was about people's livelihoods, and so I wanted to hear from you all, as members of organizations that have really, I think, stepped up to respond to that need. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about what that was like. And I wanted to start, actually, if I could, with the networks first, because those are made of the individual makers. So either Robert or Iyabo, if you could start with what that was like and how that response took place in a network like Brown Girls Doc Mafia or ADOC, and then we can move on to the organizations. Iyabo, you want to go first?
Yeah, Iyabo.
Okay, sure. So yeah, I mean, the thing that's really beautiful about Brown Girls is that we've always been built on more of a both a creative professional enrichment resource sharing, you know, tangible growth space in terms of professionalism. But there's also this huge component that is already emotional and holistic and based on a real gut, you know, a gut feeling, a gut need, vulnerability. And so I feel like I'm so grateful that, I'm so grateful that Brown Girls exists and that people have gone with me on this kind of crazy journey to be vulnerable with each other all the time, both in a professional way and also in a real human way, because that has been the thing that has, I think, kept us together, that has brought people even more into the group, and engaging more and more with what's happening on our page. But folks definitely are hurting, you know. We've had 5 sort of COVID check-ins like on Zoom like this, with usually about 30 to 50 people on a call, and they started out real dark, of course, as you can imagine, you know, and they got lighter and lighter, and people were seeking resources and, you know, and then moving into being able to joke with each other and really lift each other up. So we were set up well for this, but over half of our membership has, just like estimating, have small businesses, you know, and a lot of them are people who are the breadwinners in their families who are taking care of other folks in the families in a parenting or caregiving way, especially being people of color, of course, and being a lot of women. So people are hurting. There's a lot of money lost, but there's a lot of hope. You know, there's opportunities for new collaborations. There's a lot of call for rebuilding the documentary industry, for collaborating amongst each other, and also reaching out to other organizations. Yeah, I think I've lost track of the original question, but there's so much depth in terms of like hardship, but starting to see the silver linings. A lot of folks are excited about having time to just recover, you know, to just be quiet and to sleep and call their loved ones and think about projects that they have been putting off or things that they wish that they had been doing, and even just the idea of having any kind of silver lining, you know, there's been finding depth in that, finding depth in centering oneself and being quiet for a while. So it's been okay.
Yeah. No, Robert, did you want to add to that a little bit?
Yeah, just to echo what Iyabo's said, that you know, it definitely, it's been a process, kind of, you know, going through the shock, building community, trying to figure out what to do next, scrambling to make sense of all the various resource lists, being grateful for the collaboration between, you know, IDA, Firelight, and Sundance, and ITVS. So, you know, to kind of help make sense of the landscape. I will add that for ADOC, you know, it's been really helpful that this moment comes at a time when the communities already started to come together, because if we'd had this pandemic like 3 years ago, I think it would have been much different and much harder. But, you know, ADOC's come together, Brown Girls has come together, and for ADOC, we've gotten used to Slack. We've gotten our complaining out of the way over Slack, so it's a functional platform for us to kind of build community. So with that, you know, we've been able to set up our Slack channel on helping each other vent and trade tips and all of that. We're quickly able to pull together this ADOC stories in the time of coronavirus, like mini doc series, as a way of kind of taking advantage, finding an outlet for the energy that was there, and kind of pivoting, although I'm trying to see how long I can go without using the word pivot. but you know, essentially, yeah. So in the prep call, the joke was that maybe we would do a drinking game where every time someone said pivot, that we would have to take a drink. So pivot.
I'm game.
Yeah. So anyway, it's been great that the community's been there and the infrastructure has been there. That having been said, I think, yes, times are tough, and they will be super tough. So part of the question is, how do we stick it out as, you know, human beings and as filmmakers? Because it's going to be a very resource constrained environment going forward. You know, because if it is like the Great Depression or 1918 or any of the other great tragedies, global tragedies, you know, there's just going to be less going around, and what are people going to do? So if we can, you know, come together as a community, then we can make sure that the things that got us into this in the first place, which we know are still relevant and maybe even more important than before, that we can keep those values alive and use them to kind of shape whatever world we're going to emerge into as we go forward.
That's a
But
great segue.
and when I say community, I'm kind of thinking about it in this like bigger Hollywood Squares image I have of the community now, and thinking about how, you know, it's not just the CAAM community, but how allyship is so crucial right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that Monica got booted off, but she's texting and saying she's going to try to jump back in shortly. But is it really hot in New York? Is that why? It's like
Yeah,
It is hot.
it's 80 degrees right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, I thought that was a great segue. Maybe, you know, either, well, any one of you three, Michael, Carrie, or Karim, could jump in with how the institutions have looked at this, and, you know, what the, I mean, you know, different from a network, how were the organizations looking at what was going on, you know, in the community, and what was that process of figuring out, okay, we should do this, A, B, and C. Maybe Carrie, do you want to start this off?
Sure. It's a good question, you know, and it's ongoing. I mean, that metaphor of the sprint and marathon is something I've been saying a lot. And I said it differently though, Robert, which is that's not really sustainable to do a sprint and a marathon at the same time, or even really possible. So I think, you know, this is an ongoing conversation, has been pointed out, is that this is not ending anytime soon. And we don't actually know, we can't foresee yet what it all means to the field, to our institutions, to the small businesses that Iyabo talked about. And so, you know, we're actually, to be totally honest, we're a little bit torn sometimes, and having lots of really deep conversations about what to do next. And how do you plan for the future, and for future discussions when we have really no idea what's going to be happening in reality and on the ground. So what we've tried to do at IDA is to think about things that are actually practical and useful and helpful in the moment, that have some clarity to them. So when it was the PPP loan, you know, when those were unfolding, what could we do with Firelight, with ITVS? Right now, what can we do to lobby for and to advocate for freelancers in getting some relief and unemployment relief? You know, those types of really practical things. As many of you know, we were being asked almost daily for guidelines on whether people could shoot and how they could do it safely. And after much debate and interrogation, we really felt strongly that that was not something we could advise on at this time, because the story changes by the hour, actually, it seems, and how we understand, which is incredibly painful, because we I run a production fund. I'm the first one who wants people to get out there in the world, and I'm a filmmaker myself. So it's been challenging to know how best we can serve the field. And I guess what I can say is we're doing the best we can. And what we're depending on is from the community to kind of take the lead and tell us what they need. At the same time, before this happened, we were planning for Getting Real in September. And we had already determined our pillars, our kind of themes. And one of them was possibility. And this idea of reimagining the field and thinking about what was possible. And now that's more resonant, actually. And so one of the concerns I have as I'm watching things unfold, so SAG released a statement maybe yesterday, many of you saw, to protect its members, that they didn't want anyone to sign a contract without SAG reviewing it for safety protocols and for protections of SAG members. And it was, when I read it, I just thought, okay, here we go again, where doc filmmakers have none of those types of protections. They don't have any formal institution with any power that says we are here to protect you. And so that's something that I'm thinking about a lot personally, is like, what can we do to actually protect filmmakers, to get resources to them, and to leverage our collective power. So that's I think, a pretty honest statement about where we're at, and thinking about how to do some form virtually of Getting Real, led by Maggie Bowman, in the near future.
Hi, Monica, you're back. So if you guys, maybe Karim or Monica or Michael, really any one of you, but Karim, I know Sundance came up with a set of a guideline document. Do you want to address that a little bit and what your thinking was around that?
Sure. So I think, I'll sort of back into that a little bit just from your previous conversation, just talking about like what was kind of institutional response on our end. And I think, I'm fortunate that, the Institute has kind of long held, I think we're all fortunate that the Institute has sort of long held this distinction between, what are the ways that we support projects and what are the ways that we support artists? Because I think, there's a real sort of stark divide in the field in terms of, when artists can get support. And my former colleague, Rick Perez, who used to work at the Institute in our doc film program, I attribute him a lot with this quote when he talks about how, and he was speaking specifically about the documentary film community, but I think this is true for the wider community of artists across the world, basically. But you get into the situation as an artist where you're applying for poverty on a consistent basis. And so a lot of that is tied to the fact that the majority of the funding that's out there that's available for artists is project-based, and there's very little support that is designed to sustain artists in a really fundamental way as individuals. And particularly within this country, that's something that there's a distinct lack of. And I think that, the Institute, Sundance Institute, has a variety of different sort of like small pockets of artist-facing grants. And within the outreach and inclusion program that I support, we're very cognizant of, how do you support communities of artists, particularly those that have been historically marginalized and continue to be marginalized, and look at supporting artists through an equitable lens. And really, not tying that support to project-based support. And I think that, as we started to enter into this crisis, a lot of the program leaders at Sundance had very similar thoughts, which is just like, we're moving into a space where none of us are going to be able to hold our labs up at the resort. We still need to support artists to advance their projects, but also like what's really, really needed right now is, folks that are depending on production work that's getting canceled, people that are depending on, speaking gigs to be able to sustain themselves, all of that's going away. And so how do you redirect as much of the resources of the Institute as possible towards just rapid response artist relief and applying a layer of equity to that in the foreground so that that is like the core lens of what we're looking at. And so, that sort of bubbled up from the bottom across a lot of programs within the Institute, but it also came from the top down. And so we were all very quickly talking about this, and it just quickly became a process by which, how do we kind of standardize that and kind of sync that up, just given the fact that we're not an organization that's set up to disperse, you know, hundreds or thousands of grants in a very rapid period. And so that's a lot of what kind of led to what a lot of folks have probably seen over the last month or so is what we've been calling the Respond and Reimagine plan, which was $1 million that we were able to repurpose, a third of that towards existing program support. So granting that it comes through our existing artist programs, including the documentary fund, which is obviously a big way that we support artists and has been a foundational way that we've historically supported artists. But then also putting a third of that money into the artist relief grants, which is managed by a collective of organizations that anyone can apply to. It's an open application. And we've tried to work with them to make the barrier for entry for that application as low as possible, because there's so much that artists are needing to apply for just to be able to sustain themselves. And that's something that is obviously not lost on us, as we're trying to, you know, make it as easy as possible and disperse that money as quickly as possible. And then the other piece of it is just recognizing that there's a lot of smaller artist organizations, artist support organizations, and artist collectives that are really in danger of surviving this in a very real way. And, you know, that the work that we try and do at Sundance is only successful because of the partnerships that we have with a variety of organizations that are really functioning in really deep community specific ways, in ways that we never could. And so, you know, it's been really important for us to try and figure out, is there a way for us to support organizations in that space? And so those are kind of the big pillars of like the Respond and Reimagine campaign, or not campaign, but the program. I don't know what to call it. The other thing is that we just launched this thing that we've been collaborating with Doc Society and Field of Vision on, which is addressing kind of, Carrie, what you were just mentioning, which is this idea of, you know, how do you know when it's safe to enter production again? And I think that those are things that doc filmmakers and scripted filmmakers, fiction filmmakers are really struggling with right now. And I think, you know, obviously for documentary filmmakers, there's a particular challenge in terms of like, you know, those that are shooting in, you know, longitudinal, you know, sort of story driven frameworks, you know, what is going on with your story right now? What are you able to capture right now? What is actually continuing in this current moment where, you know, there's a lot of things that are on pause, but people's lives are absolutely not on pause, and they continue to progress in, you know, ways that are really painful. And, you know, I want to come back to this in a minute, but like, you know, there are certain things that like a good friend of mine, who's an immersive media artist based in New York, he sort of likes to talk about like what the light of Corona shines upon. And he uses that within the context, and I use it within the same context of, you know, what do we see now that is illuminated by the current pandemic that is an exacerbation of, you know, really deep structural problems and inequities that have existed for a very, very long time that really need to be fixed right now in this moment, so that we don't get caught up in this idea of how do we get back to normal, but how do we progress to something that is actually better than what we came from. And so I want to underline that in a minute, but you know, this idea of like, you know, people's lives continuing, needed to document that. I think, you know, folks are really struggling with, you know, how do you minimize risk as opposed to eliminate it, because there is no model for risk elimination in production right now. And, you know, I have producer fellows of mine that I'm talking to like right now, like earlier today, I was speaking with someone who, you know, had to shut down a production. This is a scripted feature production. They had to shut down a production 8 days before they were able to wrap. And they're getting a lot of pressure from them, for their financiers to finish the film. But, you know, they're trying to only return into production when it's safe. But at the same time, they're catching wind of, you know, studios targeting like summer production dates to kind of go back on location. And there's a real fear from the independent filmmaking community that, you know, when things do open up again, that like all the crew and, you know, all the locations and everything that you need to be able to start shooting again is going to be, you know, swept up by, you know, these studios that are able to kind of come in there and do it, and, you know, are maybe less sensitive to these kinds of risks. And so, you know, this thing that we were collaborating with Doc Society and with Field of Vision on was, you know, just a means of like, how do you assess risk minimization through a production lens, right? Recognizing that there is no way to eliminate risk, but, you know, it's within the filmmaker's hands to be able to chart what is, you know, what do they feel like is the best possible risk for them. And so to be able to share that resource, and it's something that we, you know, just recently published, I think just earlier this week. And so that's available for everybody. You can check it out on the Sundance website. But I want to really like undergird this thing that like, you know, as we're in this moment where, you know, we're looking at the manifestations and the repercussions of, you know, an artist economy that puts very little, if any, power in the hands of the artists to be able to chart their own destinies and their own fates, and to be able to have ownership in their work and be able to monetize their own work in ways that don't require permission from intermediaries or, you know, third parties, that, you know, there's a real opportunity for movement building and coalition building within artist communities and within the communities of organizations that support them, to really think in a very pointed way about, you know, how do you build something that is fundamentally more just and equitable, you know, as we move forward, and try and think through, you know, how do we not get back to normal, but actually progress to something that is going to help protect us from a situation like this in the future. Sorry for the rant, but it's kind of hard to talk about one without talking about all of it.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Karim. Monica and Michael, did you guys want to add something to this portion about the response from your organizations that you wanted to speak to a little bit?
Sure. And sorry, Michael, did you want to go?
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I missed part of it. I don't know what happened to my internet. Yeah, I would say, I'll just say briefly, and hopefully it's not repetitive from anything you know, Carrie was sharing before I lost, but you know, we've partnered a lot with some of the folks here, you know, with IDA and ITVS and Sundance on all of the, you know, webinars and support for folks to apply for relief when Congress passed relief. And we also quickly that it was not nearly sufficient. And the historical inequities that existed long before this crisis around banking, especially for folks of color, you know, and the way filmmakers structure their businesses, it also wasn't set up to really support freelancers, which so many folks are. So, you know, I think it was an incredible Herculean effort, and it was also incredible to see how generous folks were to pool resources. And I mean, we really pulled it together quite quickly, but it was such a wonderful effort by everyone, and you know, felt like we were really meeting the need and constantly responding to folks. And we had almost 2,400 filmmakers that watched those webinars, and even the FAQs that you'll see on ITVS and IDA site, like those were all culled from every question that we got and picking kind of the most salient ones. So, you know, it was this rapid response that was really attuned to what folks needed. And, you know, IDA continues to lead that charge, and we're kind of, you know, supporting them as they will continue to roll out things to sort of meet this need. But it definitely, like, I think, you know, to what Karim was saying, it's not just around these inequities for artists, but these historical inequities that are really exposed now around how capitalism has failed many folks, like the historical class and race and gender issues that existed, that, you know, folks are even more excluded now from these efforts. And I really worry in this moment, as things start to open up, you know, who is going to be that control group of the working folks and the brown folks that are actually then having to be out and be essential. So these are the things that we think about and how we responded. So, like, you know, that was a great effort to try to get folks relief and even help them think like you are a small business. And we learned there also that, like, folks weren't set up, and there was like a lack of financial acumen that's actually really important for it to weather something like this. So Firelight got some additional funding from Perspective Fund to start doing like additional consultations for POC filmmakers, not just with the CPA, but also with the bookkeeper. And we're kind of seeing here like a larger gap, and that we want to keep addressing. Because, you know, then I think about, like, there are folks that may not survive, like we will survive it hopefully as a people, although of course there is loss that's being experienced, but like, what are the filmmakers that may not actually weather this period that will continue making films? So we're really trying to think about, and not just us, but, you know, in all our partner organizations that are working with all of these communities, how do we strengthen them? How do we build them up? How do we carry them through this period? Because your stories are the ones that really matter, and that's what we're here for. So, you know, and I'll just say that, you know, in our efforts, we're just trying to listen. We surveyed, you know, our filmmakers, as many folks are. We've had a lot of calls to try to gather input. Marcia Smith, our president's going to be writing a white paper based on our calls. And we're also going to be putting out some like op-eds, hopefully through outlets, but also just through our blog, because there's just, you know, like Cecilia Alderando could write like 10 op-eds right now about Puerto Rico and how she describes it as like, you know, it's, what is she, you know, that what happened in Puerto Rico is like, you know, a cautionary tale that she says Puerto Ricans should tell. And her film was meant to premiere at Tribeca. And thankfully, like, she will have a broadcast on POV, but she's part of this generation of filmmakers that is like missing the class of 2020, that like some folks are calling it, that is missing this opportunity to connect. And it's wonderful that CAMFest and other folks are still providing those ways to connect, but, you know, folks are just having to really rethink and reimagine, and I think looking to us for leadership, but I think also there's a lot of power, and this is where ADOC and Brown Girls is led, in what the filmmakers can, you know, also lead and tell us these are what our needs, and hold all of us accountable, because, you know, we maybe can be that Trojan horse that can put pressure in various places, listening to what filmmakers say that we need. So yeah, I also, like Karim, could just like sort of go off in multiple ways, but, you know, I'll just say that, you know, in this moment we're listening, and we want to just continue to be there. We're you know, we're privileged to be in the position that we're in, that we're a healthy organization that's going to continue to do the work and expanding the work. This was Firelight's 20th year, so we already were like expanding and rolling out some incredible programs for folks, like most of which are development and impact, which is great, because that's really what's needed right now and what you can still do. So, you know, how can you still develop a film? How can you creatively reach audiences, you know, not just on Netflix? And because they're still there and they want to see your stories, and Campus is one of these ways. So, you know, but we're also just seeing the strength of, we love to partner, we're good at partnering, it's in our blood, like to be activists and organized. So, you know, with everyone here, we'll continue to organize and also be organizing with all of these filmmaker collectives that also are, you know, helping us be very clear from the folks that are acutely affected, how we can support you and put your voices at the front.
Great, thank you, Monica. Michael, I don't know if you wanted to add anything. I know, I mean, ITVS obviously has so many filmmakers that you're working with, and a lot of them probably in development or production.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I would just, you know, agree, you know, that nobody has all the answers right now, but what's so valuable right now is that we can all be in dialogue to come up to know what all the questions are, right? So that's what happened in, you know, when the sprint of getting those webinars together, and we got probably more information back, or at least in the form of questions, than we were able to answer. And then, you know, and working with groups of filmmakers, those of us who are working actively, you know, and supporting co-productions like we do at ITVS, you know, where I sit as a supervising producer, I'm directly in touch with individual teams, and they just are letting me know, you know, where they're MacGyvering to get things done in post and figure out these new digital distribution opportunities that have come up. There's so many unprecedented things, and you know, it's helpful to be able to have all of these things kind of bubbling up around us. We, again, may not have answers here, but we can certainly start to discuss them, you know, within our circles, and then bring that out, you know, wider in opportunities like this. You know, we're going to have some version of our independent summit this summer digitally, and hopefully have cohorts come in digitally, where we can again have these conversations. You know, so much of this has reminded me of that book by Rebecca Solnit, A Paradise Built in Hell, where, you know, their crisis and disaster really creates the conditions that throw into relief, you know, all the disparities that already were in place, and now you have these opportunities to reimagine. So it's great to hear how these themes are already coming up in the work that we do. It's hard to imagine a utopian moment in all of the mess that's happening this time, but that's just exactly when we can't give up in trying, at least, you know, at the local levels and in our peer networks and the organizations that support them. So yeah, I think just keep those questions coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if we could maybe at this point move towards, you know, what we could do together, perhaps. I mean, obviously there are so many gaps that have been exposed, like everyone has mentioned. And I mean, we have been talking about these sustainability issues for a while now, and several organizations, the IDA included, have done studies, Sundance, and there have been efforts, and Karim, you've been leading the allied organizations effort with the Sundance Institute and working with different organizations and networks. I mean, you know, still these inequities exist, right? I mean, we are not able to support the individual artist, filmmaker, documentary maker. Where are the protections for these individual makers? If you're doing a piece and you're going to pitch it to the New York Times, are they going to come forward and say, we're going to give you the insurance needed? Or, you know, how do we do those actions? I mean, we see all these gaps, you know, glaringly even more now. Perhaps we can, if you guys could address how you think this work could potentially happen for this new reimagined future. Who wants to go first? Maybe Karim?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, I think there's, I mean, I don't know that I have the answer for that. I mean, I think, you know, we're in a moment where I think it's just everyone is really struggling for survival. And I think that it is really difficult to, you know, muster the energy and the time and the white space to be able to sort of like, you know, redesign artist economies and, you know, sort of rethink what is a more equitable model for art making and sustainability within the artist community in a situation like this, right? And so I think, I don't necessarily know that I know sort of how to build that, but I mean, I do know that, like, you know, the shit that keeps me up at night is that, like, we're in a fucking election year, like, sorry, but like, you know, so like, there's a lot, there's a lot at stake right now, right? And like, you know, remote voting was, you know, never a particularly, you know, safe or equitable thing to do before we were in this global pandemic. And now we're in a situation where, you know, historically marginalized communities stand to be even more so in the run up in the manifestations to, you know, what's going to happen later this year. And so, you know, like I've started doing some work with the Guild of Future Architects, and, you know, we've been doing these sort of projections, and like the thing that I like when we're looking at inflection points in 2020 that could potentially lead toward, you know, an aspirational future, like a lot of it has to deal with collapse. In my mind, at least, like I go towards this place where like there are deeply flawed structures right now that are only potentially going to get more so over the next year. And that are going to cause a lot of pain points for a lot of individuals, you know, and maybe there's a way out of that, and, you know, maybe there isn't, but I think, you know, there's just definitely something that is really sort of like, you know, fundamentally sort of broken about our artist economies. And, you know, that's just sort of one manifestation of, you know, what Monika was alluding to earlier in terms of, you know, problems of living within a capitalist society. So, you know, I don't know that I have the solution, but I know that it's like, it's very foundational. And I think, you know, the one thing I will say is like, you know, kind of going back to some of the conversations that I've been having with some of our fellows around how do you resume production and what does it look like for filmmakers to go back into the world sooner rather than later and actually start creating something. You know, everybody's in a state right now where they're developing everything, or if you're fortunate enough to have wrapped production, you're in post and trying to get to a point where you can, you know, complete your film and maybe sell it independent of the sort of traditional model of the way that things have been sold previously, which has been so traditionally reliant on film festivals. And so, you know, if that piece of it gets rebuilt, like maybe there's a way for, you know, artists to kind of find a way towards monetizing their work that's more equitable. But, you know, at the front end of things, like everybody's in production, companies are still investing in development. They're still investing in packaging films. You know, we just did a webinar a couple of weeks ago that was tied to a women's financing and strategy intensive where Carrie was one of our panelists. And one of the things we sort of unpacked is just where are people putting money right now? And so, you know, one of the things that was manifest is like a lot of people are putting money into development, a lot of people are putting money into packaging, and just kind of waiting for that moment when things are going to be able to go into production again. you know, but the interesting thing is there's been these sort of like models for like safe production, like COVID safe production that have been circulating around the industry right now. And all of them involve, you know, sort of having very small productions. And there's something really interesting about that. I mean, you know, the precautions involved in that might make it sort of cost prohibitive in current circumstances for independent films to actually enact those kinds of methods. But the piece that goes with that, though, is that like it's going to be really difficult to actually produce like a big budget studio production like over the course of the next year. And that ironically, like there is maybe more sustainability and viability for small independent productions to actually go out and be safe and actually complete their films in a way that, you know, big budget Hollywood films were never really able to do. And so, you know, as this pandemic goes on and as the ramifications of it on, you know, film production persist, I think there is maybe something in that for, you know, independent artists to be able to sort of reclaim if, you know, the sort of cost benefit is able to be kind of weighed out. And so maybe, you know, between that and sort of like a leveling of, you know, the way that films get bought and sold independent of, or, you know, in sort of maybe a re-envisioned model of like what a festival is, you know, the current iteration of CAAMFest as a testament to that, you know, there might be something of a sort of leveler that is able to kind of like lower the barrier of entry between artists and the people that monetize their work. And I don't know what that looks like, but I think there is something really interesting in that I've been really galvanized by talking to a lot of our partners, many of you being in this virtual room right now, around how do you build that.
Can I just follow up on some of that or piggyback on some of it? I mean, in some ways, I totally agree with everything you just said. And I guess there's a part of me that wonders if it doesn't have to get much worse before it gets much better. I mean, one of the true things is that they, you know, all of the powers that be depend on independent filmmakers. I mean, they are dependent on us to create content, and there's a real hunger and thirst for content. And we haven't really been able to be the recipients of that desire, right? Like we do the development work, we do the heavy lifting, the money comes in later, but the independents assume and have historically assumed all the risk up front. And I think, like, to me, a reimagining would be if some of those people with deep pockets would come in earlier instead of later, right? And I think that's going to happen. And my only concern is that that the individuals and filmmakers who were already well positioned before this are well positioned to carry on right now, because I think production is going to be more expensive. It's more difficult right now. Who gets the PPE? You know, how do you acquire that stuff? How do you put those protocols in place? I was just on a call the other day with an insurance broker who said, oh, by the way, yes, we used to have it was a COVID exclusion at first, but now it's a communicable disease exclusion. So there's going to be an entire exclusion on all production. So what is that going to look like for the independents? You know, we don't understand if workers' comp will maybe come in to solve some of that. We just have no idea. So I feel like the people with resources are going to kind of be able to move through this space in the short term and to get work done. And we already see some of that out in the media, those productions that are happening. But the same people who've always been excluded are going to be further excluded, because it's just the barriers to entry right now are going to be much, much, much higher. And if they're actually just going out there, then that means they're putting themselves at much more risk. And these are people who are already at risk. So I feel like there's going to be a pipeline issue that maybe at some point, if we all can come together, all of us, and have some collective power and some collective energy and make some demands, that everything might end up being okay. But that in the short term, I worry it's going to get worse.
Yeah, I'm not on the production front, but I guess on the other, just in terms of your question, Sapana, what could we do? You know, I think about the filmmakers that we're working with now in our labs and our various like shorts initiatives. And for ones that are in development, you know, where you're always like talking to folks about like access. What access do you have to the story? How are you going to tell it? I'm also really talking with them like, how will you film it if you can't travel? Like, how will you film it if it has to be a super local story? How are you going to ensure the protection of your crew? and of the folks that you're filming with. And Jackie Olive, one of our alumni who's developing a short she's one of our frontline Firelight fellows, you know, she was actually trained as a firefighter before she started making films. And she was saying there's actually a way to do this safely. And so and I know there's been various like seminars on like what production might look like, but you know, we want to develop with her like a toolkit around some safety protocols. That would be, you know, I think there's potential, but certainly the insurance question that Carrie raised is high. But I think in that terms of that like development, you know, I think it is an opportunity. My coworker Chloe Walters Wallace said something like very early on, like that she wants to think about not just what we lose in this moment, but what it's going to give us. And that's something that like we've kept coming back to. What is it giving you in this moment? You know, which maybe even as tough it is juggling, it's also this like precious time. If you've got like elders or children at home, it's maybe time with your film to think about it a different way, how that pause is making you connect with the material in a way that you know, when in that sort of awful like hamster wheel of like gotta fundraise, gotta sell myself, and it all looks different. Like, how do you connect with the material in a different way and think about like what is really essential about it? And I've always believed in like alternative networks and spaces. I don't know if it's like being a kid that grew up in the 90s and loving like all alternative culture, from like zines and music to art and film, and felt like that's where things that were really interesting, what was kind of like not necessarily just mainstream, but things that happened around the fringes that then like became what was interesting in the mainstream. And I feel like right now, like how we can actually build like a strong alternative system of like, and not even just distribution, but like maybe we think we need new words, new language to think about like, how do we reach folks where they are? So, you know, we've got folks that we're meant to release films, and they're trying to think really creatively of different ways to like roll it out themselves DIY, because they don't want to just wait when everyone else is being like very risk averse. Yes, people are hearing pitches, but it's just so difficult. And it brings me back to like a moment I want to share. Like at CAAM Fest last year, I went to CAAM Fest right after being at Tribeca Film Festival. And there was, you know, at a love-hate with Tribeca, but especially that festival where like you couldn't get into any films and all these rows blocked out for VIP folks that never showed up. And it was just like, there was no community. And then to go to CAAM Fest and go into the Castro for the opening night film on Chinatown, and like all the communities there, the film community, Chinatown, San Francisco, and it was just like this beautiful moment. And I know we will have that again. We have that virtually now. And where can you like create that in various spaces, because people are like wanting that connection in any way. So I guess I just think like, how in this moment can you think back about what's essential about why you're telling it, who you essentially want to like hear and see your story, and then what are like, if that is like your guiding light in your writing and your editing, or in your like strategy in getting the film out, I think there is a way that exists outside of these things that were broken and made us all feel like we were coming from a place of scarcity, instead of something like CAAM that actually shows the strength and vitality and beauty of like community.
Thanks, Monica. I think, Iyabo, did you have something you wanted to add? I thought it connected well to what you guys are doing at you know, what we're doing at Brown Girls Doc Mafia with the Skillshare and all these other master classes.
Yeah, I also just wanted to reflect on what Monica is saying about community and festivals. Part of the core work that Brown Girls has done for many years is to try to elevate the visibility and access that women and non-binary people of color have to these larger, more mainstream festivals. And that work it's, you know, obviously it's been fantastic, but there's also always been challenges at the core of being in usually fairly mainstream, predominantly white spaces, especially in festivals that are in small towns. And it was already something that we were reconsidering or trying to find a new approach to keeping our membership physically and emotionally safe in these spaces. And just to reiterate, yeah, CAAM and Black Star have been the core like spots for rejuvenating community and feeling safe and welcome and nourished creatively and in other ways. But yeah, to talk about the other aspects too, I think that the collaboration is already there. You know, folks on this call, and we've been talking with ADOC Firelight and Brown Girls and Sundance for a few years, and with ITVS and with the IDA Getting Real conference, bringing POC filmmakers together. Brown Girls is doing Skillshare right now with 135 members in 26 small groups over the next 6 weeks to just kind of exchange information, to do the professional, creative, and also the holistic personal, emotional stuff work together, to be able to kind of get off these like 73-person Zooms and being more, more in like a 4-person Zoom to dive in a bit deeper. Deeper into what this means, because I appreciate what you all are saying about production, but for Brown Girl, for my community, and for I think a lot of us, production was affected, but it's kind of like a thing that we're still would have been working towards. There's a lot of filmmakers. Most of our filmmakers are what we're calling sort of emerging folks. So the question, I think, also is like, what happens to people who are building a career, who might not have had a project this year, but that were working towards a bigger career in the next couple of years? And how do they continue? How do they have the financial stability to still feel like making films is a viable option at all? As a human being, because it's a very expensive hobby that we all enjoy very much, but it's like when it comes down to brass tacks, like how can we keep doing this moving forward? And so I think, in addition to the production conversation with Brown Girls, we've been talking a lot about just taking the space for learning, for saying, okay, I was on the hamster wheel, now I'm off. What were the things that I needed to be shoring up anyways in the meantime? How can how can I improve my work as a director? How can I think differently as an editor? Like attending these master classes, really applying oneself in a creative way, so that when the doors reopen, hopefully they're stronger, they have a clear sense of their voice, et cetera, so that those opportunities will be there for them, and they'll be ready to meet them at that point. And thinking a lot about our younger members, and thinking about the next generation and folks who are graduating from college right now, and how do we continue to create mentorship and pipeline structures, so that we don't lose a whole generation or we don't lose 2 generations of POC filmmakers and women filmmakers. So I think the Skillshare is a huge support towards that. And checking in emotionally and professionally. We're doing some master classes with Brown Girls members, and continuing our connecting members with funders and sort of small roundtable Zooms looking forward, and trying to develop our community regionally as well, so that maybe the small group Zooms can turn into like small group 6 feet distance, park hangouts, and also looking to collaborate with other organizations. How can we engage with, I don't know, it's tough. Like I've been on a couple of these doc space groups, just 2 in particular that I won't name, that are still very white Zoom, quads, very white. I'm still looking at a lack of diversity in these spaces. And I know that everyone's jumping on looking for support in a reactionary way, but I just want to urge all of us to remind ourselves and to remind any of these kinds of calls and spaces that we're on, that in a rebuild and reimagine space, we need to be vigilant at the beginning of all the new things that are happening, or the refreshes of things that are happening, that we are looking for diversity, and looking for allyship, and reimagining what that looks like. Like, the answer before of, oh, let's do a diversity committee, like that's just, we know that doesn't work. So I just challenge all of us to continue. I know it sucks that we have to keep doing this work for ourselves, but to stay vigilant on that. On the Brown Girls website, in the FAQ, there's a question, how to be an ally, that I think could be helpful for anyone that wants to share with communities that they're struggling to see diversity in their membership.
Thank you, Iyabo. I think I really appreciate that, recognizing, I feel like in the networks, especially in the Brown Girls Doc Mafia, as well as in ADOC, recognizing the power in that network, right, of these individuals, and that you don't have to pay into anything or pay subscription service to be able to contribute or benefit from some of these skills that all of the folks in the community have. I wanted to maybe have Robert talk a little bit about what ADOC is doing. I know initially, I think it was Grace or somebody started the whole Surviving COVID-19 channel on Slack on ADOC, and that sort of snowballed into a lot of different things. You know, first it was like all these resources were being listed, and then there was a lot of, I think, a need, and they created an AMA for really mental sanity support. You know, we had a session, I think it was last week or the week before. And now I know you guys are doing the curated shorts pieces. Can you talk a little bit about, the network and what they're doing?
Sure, absolutely. But just before I get there, I've been thinking about this article by Arundhati Roy, "Pandemic as a Portal." That Emily Hong brought it up a couple days ago, and it's popped up in other places too. And it's such a fantastic image, right? That this moment of disruption opens up possibilities for the world going forward, and that in this crisis there is opportunity. I think the thing is that that's still an aspiration, and it's not totally clear how we're going to get from here to there, especially when people are dealing with very, very basic survival issues, as people, as filmmakers, right? But I think, one thing that's absolutely clear is that, if we're going to survive, it's going to be as a community, and that continuing, these sorts of spaces and continuing this sort of organizing on all sorts of levels is going to be so crucial. Both, organizing in terms of mutual support as filmmakers, organizing as citizens leading up to the election, all of that, and organizing as consumers of media. How, if we're going to enter into a world where there are going to be like viable alternative models, we need to figure out how to get there, and like how to break our Netflix and Amazon Prime addictions. Easier said than done, sure, but as individuals and as a group, we really need to understand our muscle in that regard, and flex our muscle. So and one space for that is groups like Brown Girls Doc Mafia and ADOC for sure. And one of the neat things about ADOC is how it is a very filmmaker-driven organic space. So since we'd kind of built this Slack community, that community was there, and we had the channel where people came together to kind of go through the processes of like COVID grief, COVID acceptance, all of that kind of thing. Right, the mutual support through that network. And as Sapana mentioned, we've done Ask Me Anything sessions in the past, and we recently had one on mental health issues, which is super important for the doc community. I know NYWIFT in New York, New York Women in Film and Television, had one also recently, and this is also, the Asian American community has its own particular relationship to this issue, and it was super nice to do that. The other observation about that is that we've been doing these Zoom sessions for a while, and this one actually was structured as a kind of Slack AMA because everyone needed a break from Zoom, and it actually worked out pretty well as a as a Slack AMA because it was kind of a different way, a way of taking a break from Zoom, but also having a community that existed. And the other thing that's been going on is the ADOC kind of series of micro docs that where the idea was basically here's a lot of energy and talent, and frankly also some funding that was going to be used to send people to film festivals and whatnot. That we couldn't use for that. So some of that money was we did a pivot, and so we did a pivot and used that to support the series. And these pieces are actually paid, so it's a way of again, almost a token effort, but it's a way of trying to build a certain aspect of community or support the community and with whatever resources there are available. So yeah, we'll look out for that, certainly.
Yeah, that's great. I think that 2 times we've said pivot in this discussion, both came from you, Robert. So.
Well, there's a third. So
one more, yeah. Well, thank you for that. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit zoomed out. This is the last session of 6 sessions over 2 days. It seemed like a great idea when we planned this like last month, but as you all know, things change really quickly. Thank you all for being so eloquent. Okay, so we do have a little bit of time left. And I didn't want to miss, so there are so many great points, but I wanted to perhaps talk a little bit more about this, pandemic as a portal, and, what you think are some of the main, there are so many issues, but what would you like to personally or institutionally focus on? And because Carrie, the IDA is getting real is impacted. You guys were supposed to have and we were all looking forward to it. And I really like the focus that you had created, and I'm blanking right now. But if you could talk a little bit about, how you've taken this opportunity to reimagine getting real, and why you did that.
Well, it's a work in progress, and we've heard from many of you, and we need to hear more. It actually makes me, not to add another Zoom to our plates, but I think we actually need to sit down together to talk about it. To be totally honest, one concern we have is that come September, how will people feel having participated in many of these online sessions, and what can we bring, starting to plan now, what can we bring that will be relevant, valuable, and also what kind of charting this reimagining, right, of really in a really pragmatic way. So it's very much in progress, but it's also, we're just like everybody where we have this tiny footprint. It might seem big, but it's actually a fairly small staff, and the rapid response stuff has taken a lot of time and energy. And so we kind of had a come to Jesus moment this week where it's like, we want to continue the rapid response work, but we actually need to start really focusing on getting real and trying to imagine that. And it seems like it's not that far away, but things are just changing so quickly. And we really are kind of contending with this idea that will everyone feel totally burnt out by then on these digital gatherings, and what can we do that's innovative and that brings together really important conversations to the field. And I just wanted to thank Iyabo for saying what you said, which, for those of us in this room who are POCs, like, we know what it means to be an artist as a person of color and how many of us don't pursue it in the best of circumstances because it's just not viable for us. But that idea that we might lose on a lot of different levels, a generation of artists to this, much the way we lost a generation of artists during the AIDS epidemic is really stark. And to thank you for saying that. I hadn't really thought of it in that exact way, but I think you're totally right. And it's really worrisome. So that in some ways, you know, the more we all talk, the more that starts to kick off our conversations at IDA about what are the things that we really need to talk about here. And also, again, that, you know, what this pandemic will look like a few months from now. I hope it's better, but one of the concerns we really have too is this, is the idea of spread, that it's so contagious, it's so unique to any illness we've seen in a long time. The idea that you can spread asymptomatically is very, very unique and very little understood. And as we know, most of the subjects of our filmmakers are some of the most vulnerable people in our society. And how do we protect them? You know, I love Jackie, but if you look at the idea that frontline workers are safe is just not true. Doctors are dying, nurses are dying. All the people who clean the hospitals are dying. So I think we have to be real. You know, I hate to be I keep calling myself the Grim Reaper of documentary, but I don't want to do that. But I really think we have to be really serious and vigilant about that idea that this is really deadly in ways that we don't understand for people that we can't identify. So, you know, it's an ongoing conversation. So I don't think that totally answers the getting real conversation. All I can say is it is in planning. We are, you know, we are planning it. We are going to do something. We're tossing around different ideas of how to structure it, which I think we'll decide fairly soon. But then, you know, the content comes next. And I think it's going to have to be in a certain way, more of an evolving agenda than any of us are accustomed to. But we want to hear from you, and we want to hear, you know, from the people who are watching, from the people in our community. I mean, we want to hear from all of you, and we want to work together to build something that, as close as we can, replicates what usually happens during that 3-day event.
Thank you, Carrie. I think Stephen wanted to jump in with a comment here. Stephen, did you want to go next?
Thank you very much, Sapana. Sorry, but you invited me, so you know I can't shut up. I found all of your presentations, your thoughts, just so stimulating, and I had to take some notes. And I think it's something that 2 or 3 of you have said, but Robert, you and Carrie and Monica, you've certainly talked about what I want about something that spurs this. You know, in putting on the summit and CAAMFest, I can tell you, you know, that as a staff, we didn't know 3 weeks ago what this would look like. I mean, we are really, really pushing the envelope in a way from, you know, working from home. And I just have to give so much thanks to this staff. They are amazing. They're like all of you too. Just really good, thoughtful, smart, and so we're learning a few things, you know, and there's gaffes and there's you know, dropped out, you know, streaming stuff. I mean, we're going through that too. But I did want to say we're learning a few things, and you know, we can't solve everything, but I wanted to sort of make a comment on a couple of threads. And those of us who are in institutions, you know, this is our work. What is that next thing we're going to try to do, right? And that's our responsibility. And I know we're carrying the weight of being connected to larger communities, you know, and the reason we're all doing this, the larger society and cultural impact. But as I said, the close-in one is what we do. So we had, you know, the 5-hour series and a town hall right before that. So something amazing has happened in a way, because this is also on the theme of what does this pandemic give us that's unusual, right? That you make the worst of your situation the sign of what you can do moving forward. So we were able to get, you know, really incredible community leaders, public servants. You know, we had a congresswoman, a president of a foundation. There is almost no way in a real live situation that we could have coordinated schedules to get people like that, certainly not in a 3-week time frame. but we got them. And I know that the people in all of the projects we're talking about that we really care about, like with the election, you know, like having an amazing and important film like And She Could Be Next, which in a way is connecting, I can only imagine, could connect to hundreds of local races involving women in politics, running to be reelected, but also running to be elected for the first time. We could put together, so one of the, and the point that was just last made, are we tiring though of town halls, you know? At what point can we, you know, who are we trying to attract? But let's just say we're trying to make the case that important stories that matter or are relevant right now need to be the linchpin for gatherings of the importance of storytelling for the field, but also to those kinds of leaders in different communities, right? And it just depends on the subject, but I'm definitely thinking, you know, we've got to cross over all of these divides of types of communities. Artist was a wonderful way to think about it in one sense, but journalism is facing the same kind of issue, you know, civic engagement in different parts of the Asian American community. I think we could mutually, and this is where a Sundance or Tribeca imprimatur is really important, because that helps bring in that other layer that we cannot easily get. So just a thought, but I think part of the beautiful thing is that we have deep connections in a lot of areas, and right now is the time to think about, let's look at this moment, because we can get the attention of a lot of people because there's no other noise in a way. There's a certain amount of noise, but we don't want to turn that on every day, you know, because it's a horror show. So we need something else to both sustain us and then to make real plans. So I'll stop there. I think you get the idea. Thank you.
Cheers, Stephen. Thank you. I can always rely on Stephen for some words of wisdom. That's why he's here. I know we only have a few minutes left, and I didn't want to, you know, abruptly stop this Zoom without, you know, hearing some last words from everyone. It's been a super enlightening discussion today. Thank you all for joining yet another Zoom. Please, Michael, maybe you could start off with a few last words before we end.
I just want to pick up the thread where, you know, from Stephen and say that what was so joyful for me in joining CAAM Fest as an audience member was just watching a movie, you know, that I couldn't see anywhere else, and I was watching it with other people. So that sense of eventness and freshness and original work, and the Q&A and performances by the musicians afterwards was really wonderful, you know, that. And I think if you think back to the Great Depression and the WPA, the cultural legacy of that was, you know, what America looked like and what creativity, how it could manifest in so many ways. And unfortunately, nobody will come out at the government level and pay for that, but we can do the work, at least get that started. And so celebrating the work by experiencing it is really what's really important right now.
Thank you, Michael. Cheers. Yeah. Next, I'm just gonna, if you feel so inclined, please speak up, but otherwise I will call on you because we do have to wrap up. Maybe Iyabo, would you like to go next?
Sure. I was just gonna say thanks again for this, and I want to encourage us to keep, as my mom always says, circle the wagons, for us to keep circling the wagons and thinking about our collective communities amongst these organizations, and also thinking about our own financial strength within POC spaces, and how we can, if there's opportunities for us to pull together and support each other in giving circles kind of ways. So, you know, I think there's more of us than, I mean, Brown Girls now has 3,700 members around the world, which is freaking crazy. And I think if we pulled that together with everyone else, we'd have a solid pool of folks that could, you know, could have some energy around a fundraiser that could support other filmmakers of color. I also just want to point out on filmmakers one side and thinking about folks in spaces like us who are trying to build careers as film industry professionals in nonprofit and for-profit executive spaces, something that's near and dear to my heart. We got to keep our eye on those folks who are trying to build careers in this new environment too. So let's also make sure that we're keeping an eye on those young professionals in these coming months too. Thank you all. It's so wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you, Iyabo. I'm going to just go down the line here. Robert, do you want to go next? There are several pivots in the chat, by the way. So if you want to take a couple swigs.
Okay. Well, cheers, all. And happy Friday. I don't know. So many things to say and so many unknowns. And yeah, I'm thinking about Iyabo's comment about this being a very expensive hobby in the best of times, right? And now here we are, and how many of us can really afford hobbies other than bread baking, or if we're lucky, matcha mochi cake, right? For those people that have the recipe. But I am so grateful that CAAM exists and that this space exists. It gives me hope, right, to see this work going on, and that's fantastic. I want to thank you all for that, especially you hard workers that are pulling it all together through the Zoom fatigue. And the other thing I want to note is something that Posi Teng brought up a couple days ago on another one of these very helpful CAAM events online, which is that in this moment of disruption, we don't really know what's going to happen next. So it's important to, in some sense, be okay with that, because the alternative is madness, right? And also to learn to live in the present. So I'm trying to take that to heart and understand that, while we may not necessarily know where things are going to go, we can remember kind of the values that drove us before this moment and that bring us into this moment, and recognize that those are even more important than they are now. So, and we need to build on those. And I'm really grateful for CAAM and these other organizations that create the spaces on which we can build on the values that we hold so dear. So thank you all.
Thank you, Robert. Carrie, you're next on my screen.
Yeah, to piggyback on Iyabo again, my mom always said, it's all what you make of it. My whole life. And anytime I had a crisis or something, she would just look at me and say, well, it's all what you make of it. And I guess that's kind of the situation that we're in. And I totally agree with what Robert just said about, we don't really know what's next. But what I do know is that what keeps me in the independent documentary space is I think that people in our field are some of the biggest thinkers, visionaries, problem solvers that exist in the world. And I have total faith in us and in our community to be creative in this moment, to solve the big problems, to fight the good fight, to tell the important stories. And so even though I definitely feel the unknowns and feel the weight of that, I'm totally confident that we are, as well poised as anybody to meet this moment. I totally believe that. And so I do look forward to fighting the good fight, regardless of where it takes us.
Thank you, Carrie. I am always reminded of John Else when you say fight the good fight. Monika, you're up next.
These are hard acts to follow. Although I really appreciate, Michael, what you said about cultural legacy. I'm gonna sit with that for a while, and I think that is a good charge for us to think about, like, as individual artists or the ones we work with, how are we going to be contributing to this cultural legacy? I can't add much more, so I'm going to share a quote from one of my favorite poets, who wrote, Rainer Maria Rilke, who wrote in Letters to a Young Poet, another artist living through an unprecedented time fighting in World War I. So be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything.
Wow. All right, Michael, you're up next.
Oh, I think I already had my
Oh,
turn.
you did. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Karim. Ooh.
I gotta follow Rilke. Okay. You should have closed with Monika. No pressure. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what all of my, very esteemed colleagues have said thus far, and I think there's been a ton of wisdom shared by all of them already. The only thing I guess I would add is, I think everyone is spread so thin right now, and I think artists and individuals and everyone kind of within this entire ecosystem of art creation and art appreciation and consumption. And I think it's really easy to sort of be in a moment where you feel like you don't have any power or you don't have the ability to sort of make an impact. And so going off of what some of my colleagues have said earlier, I think the thing that I've seen, which is a real opportunity, is that don't underestimate the power that you have as a consumer and someone that watches stories and experiences stories and shares stories, because I think for better or worse, and I think it's probably both, like all the old models are dead right now, and so setting aside folks spending a lot of time on things like Netflix or Prime or like whatever your streaming platform of choice is, I think artists are sharing and watching and experiencing and being moved and being impacted by their work and the work of their colleagues in really new and meaningful ways. And I think if you're looking to figure out how you can have impact on an artist who means something to you, whether it's personally or the stories that they're telling have had an impact on you, there's a real impact that you can have in just sharing those stories with your communities. And as a consumer too, I encourage everyone to just kind of like look outside kind of your usual modus operandi or your usual sort of platform of choice for viewing something, and really kind of think about, what can you be watching if you do have that moment to watch something that is something new from someone that you don't know, something that's unexpected, and share that. Because I think, when we think about not just the sustainability of artists in terms of being able to pay their bills, but as I think Iyabo was saying earlier, the ability to advance your career and find support in a way that is going to be catalytic for your career moving forward. That all comes from being able to develop critical mass and audienceship and getting building awareness around the work that you're creating. And I think there are really exciting new models that are developing right now. Excuse me. And I think there's a lot of power within the audience and within the consumer to be able to advance that.
Thank you, Karim. Yeah, that was really incredible. Thank you all so much for joining us. I know it's a lot to ask of everyone because I feel like, I don't know, but we've all had to work a little bit harder since the shelter in place to pivot, and learn all these new skills, these Zoom calls. So, here's to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for this beautiful discussion, and I'll see you hopefully in person very soon. Cheers.